It's our great pleasure to welcome to our 2024 Online Trend Summit, Riley Jackson. She's Head of Marketing and Strategic Partnerships at Ivy Farm Technologies. We're going to be discussing what's next for cultivated meat. We're going to talk obviously about Ivy Farm, but also some of those significant milestones in the development of cellular meat. We're going to talk a bit about regulatory approval, commercial partnerships, investment, also consumer readiness, and that sort of intersection between cellular meat and traditional agriculture as well. Riley, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our virtual Trend Summit stage.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to be here to chat about my favorite subject.
Brilliant. Just a quick note to those that are joining the summit today. If you're a Trend Hub subscriber, you can discover more about the topics covered in this discussion in our 25-26 food and beverage trends framework, particularly in a section of that framework called Keep It Real, and within the mega trend that we've called Alts and Plant-Based. So Riley, let's jump in. Can we just start with who and what is Ivy Farm, please?
Yeah, of course. Okay, well, Ivy Farm specifically is an Oxford, England-based cultivated meat company. We specialize in mostly beef. We started out as pork, but now focused on beef just due to its environmental impact and marketability. We were started by two people who deeply care about the impact of meat. The first is Dr. Kathy Yee, who is a professor at Oxford University, and Russ Tucker, who actually comes from a generational butcher family from Northern England who really specialize in being deeply involved with their animals and responsible farming practices. Russ grew up and became a consultant for major grocery chains all over the world at BCG and really recognize the issue that we have right now with providing protein to the world and all the implications that come with that, both environmentally and morally. So he partnered up with Kathy and they created this incredible technique. And basically what we do as a company, for those of you who probably don't know what cultivated meat is, we'll go to our Wagyu herd in Northern Ireland through a partner called Finnebrogue, and we'll take a really small biopsy of a cow. It can be the best cow of the bunch. And so we get the highest quality cells. We bring that cell back here, that group of cells back here. We distill it down to just the pure muscle and pure fat cells. And then we have a team of cellular biologists who look at that cell and they say, how do we make this able to survive in a bioreactor, which is a little bit more harsh than your typical animal body. We turn on and off different genes through genetic editing, which is different than genetic modification, which is adding in genes. We're not adding anything. We're just telling the cells what to do. And then we place those cells into their new home, which is a bioreactor, and we feed them a constellation of nutrients that's perfectly tailored to what they need to thrive and what we need as nutrients. And then out comes pure muscle and pure fat cells that are identical to the ones that we got from that initial cow. So really an incredible source of technology and a really, really fun place to work, really inspiring for the implications it will have both environmentally and again for obviously food security and not having to kill as many animals hopefully in the future.
Thank you for that, because that context I think is super important. I was just going to ask you to debunk cellular meat, so you've just done that, which is fantastic. How does what you've just described, how does that sort of manifest in, I guess, the purpose and vision of Ivy Farm? Can you bring that to life for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ivy specifically is definitely driven heavily by the science. So you'll get companies all over the world who are doing incredible work and they're focused much more on the marketability of product, or they'll do salmon or tuna or pork or all these other things. So with any cultivated meat company, you'll get kind of the focus of the type of meat and then the challenge of this industry and what they're really focused on. So for us, it's really about being the most impactful that we can be environmentally and for animals. So what that means for us is basically leveraging really incredible innovation to create a meat that is both better for us and better for the planet. So right now, 18% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from animal agriculture.
Yeah.
This might be news to everybody, but for many people, that's shocking. It's the second largest driver of greenhouse gas emissions globally. That's a big issue.
Yeah.
And all of us really love meat. I think a lot of people at Ivy Farm are meat eaters, conscious consumers, but we want to be able to eat high quality meat, but we don't want to be hurting the earth. So basically, all of us show up every day in order to preserve what meat means to many of us
Yeah.
without the numerous drawbacks of eating meat. I think just in the UK alone, we import about 7 billion pounds of meat a year, which just isn't a sustainable way to go in terms of food security and global conflict. So we really wanted to kind of take the boot off the neck of local farmers and also the global environment as well.
Really interesting to just understand it at that kind of level. How do you is there a human human health and well-being aspect to that as well? I mean, obviously we hear the sustainability piece and obviously the ethics and welfare, but is there a human health angle to this as well?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things I actually learned this year was that the World Health Organization predicts by 2050, more people will die of antibiotic resistant disease than cancer. That absolutely blew my mind.
Yeah.
And after a little bit more research, I found out that about 75% of the antibiotics that we produce right now globally go towards animals in agriculture, which just, I mean, that's
Yeah.
mind-blowing in and of itself. When you think about food waste, about a third of food in the US is wasted. When we have our scale up and running, we will waste little to no product at all. And our shelf life is predicted to be much, much, much longer than what traditional meat. I think traditional meat now is 3 to 5 days on shelf. And we're predicted to be about 12 months. Don't quote me, everyone, but when we do our testing, we'll have more on that. But I think when you think about disaster relief or going to Mars, I know some companies are working with NASA to figure out how to do that. So anyway, there's a lot of really big things, but then just the basics, let's look at security, right? Being able to produce your meat for your population in country. I'm not saying that's what everybody needs, but I think in case of crisis that we're seeing, unfortunately, all over the world right now, it would be really great for them to be able to produce their meat right next to where everybody is. And I think in terms of human health, access to clean, dependable protein is a huge issue. And then the last thing I'll say on that too, another shocking stat, full of these fun facts, is that about 18% of our global calories come from meat, which makes sense if you look at the typical diet. 80% of the arable land in the world is used for animal production. So that ratio is just out of control. It's just not very efficient. So if we could repurpose a lot of that land for nutritious crops that could go into, let's say, soy or kale, I'm not an agriculturalist, but there's more efficient things that we could be doing with that space. So as we look at how this industry is progressing, there's a lot of really incredible implications.
Yeah, no, I mean, super exciting and absolutely game-changing. You alluded then, touched on then the journey, and I suppose we're on a journey towards commercialization, and the seeds of this technology started to come through in the 1980s. But can you give us a bit of an overview of the milestones? Absolutely for Ivy Farm, but also the sort of broader cultivated meat milestones. Because I think that gives us a bit of a context for, where we've come from, looking through a cellular agriculture, cellular meat lens. But that also obviously gives us some clues to where we're going as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I appreciate you asking that question because I think one of the most tricky things and exciting things about this space is how complex it is. Because even in my role, I'm one of the only people that has a commercial background at this company. So when I'm talking about my goals, what I'm doing with my department, the way that I communicate is so different than a scientist.
Yeah.
Which is both really interesting and also can be frustrating. And I think it is a biotech industry right now. We're not selling anything.
Yeah.
So being able to understand the way that scientists perceive innovation and development is important. So
Yeah.
anybody who's interested in this space, talk to a scientist and a commercial person, and you'll get a good perspective. I'll try to give mine. Winston Churchill actually predicted this industry way back in the day, and he said someday we're going to look back on creating the entire chicken just to get the chicken breast and say that was ridiculous. Why? So this idea is not new. And like many industries, meat itself is going to have to innovate. So we've seen over the last, I think 2013 was the biggest initial milestone when Mark Post created the first cultivated meat burger, served it up in the Netherlands. So that burger was about, I think, 300,000 pounds, euros, very expensive.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was a huge deal because it showed everybody this is something. Look, this is something you can hold and touch.
Yeah.
What progression has looked like since then is basically focusing on three things. So you have cost down of the entire process, scale up of the infrastructure it takes to create the product, and then obviously regulatory. Cost down is looking at things like the cell culture media, which is that constellation of nutrients I was talking about earlier that we feed the cells. Obviously, the way that you eat food and what you select to eat based on your environment and your microbiome and the way that your body behaves, very complex. And your body takes that, breaks it down, primes it for absorption. We're trying to create that for ourselves. And right now, that's challenging. And that's what everybody is really looking at. Feed is also the most expensive thing in the animal agriculture space.
As you were saying that, I was thinking the same thing. Actually.
Exactly. Yeah, it's far and away the most expensive thing. So not a new struggle, but a struggle nonetheless. And everybody's taking great strides in figuring that out. So you'll hear about like cost per liter in this space, and that's for media.
Yeah.
For scale up, it looks like what are we making these cells happy in? What do the bioreactors look like? Are they bags? Are they steel stir tanks? Are they, all sorts of things? And really what I've seen so far, these factories or breweries are going to look like an Anheuser-Busch giant brewery with these big vats where we're protecting ourselves and making them happy.
Yeah.
And then regulatory, of course, governments are doing their very best to continue creating safe food products for people.
Yeah.
The issue right now is that it's a totally new concept, right? They have to really think about all the different implications of this, and it's very safe, right? Inherently, if we have any contamination in our bioreactor, those cells are going to get beat out for nutrients, so they won't grow and we can't produce product. So any level of contamination for us is off the table.
Yeah.
So we know it's a really safe product, but we are working really closely with regulators to make sure that they feel that way as well, and that we have checked all the boxes and we're bringing the best product to market. Because as you know, and many of you listening know, when you're disrupting an industry, you have to be better in every way. You have to be more nutritious, cheaper, more tasty, more visually appealing, great branding. It's you're just the next generation. And so regulators are really working hard to make sure that safety is also on that list of improvements as well. So those are the big three.
And what do you think the journey looks like towards regulatory approval? It's obviously it has regulatory approval in certain jurisdictions around the globe. Where with your proximity to this market, where do you think we are on that journey? And particularly with a new regime, a new government in the UK, does that have any impact on this and the journey towards regulatory approval at all?
Yeah, so you'll all have to excuse me because I have moved to the UK. I've been here since January, so I'm getting to know your lovely government in a very interesting time. Originally from the US, so I'm trying to ignore that situation as best I can. But from what I understand, the Labour government is quite open to innovation in food, and they're really focused on, pardon the pun, cultivating industry in the
Yeah.
UK, which when you're looking at the future of this country, a sustainable protein future, sustainable food sources, and creating new jobs, alternative proteins are a really good place to put money. Hint,
Yeah.
hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So for us, that looks like getting infrastructure built in the UK. So we need those bioreactor plants. We need a workforce that is happy and healthy and ready to work and wants to stay in the UK for these jobs.
Yeah.
And one of the projects we've done with Oxford University has been looking at what the economic impacts of cultivated meat are in the UK, and it's projected to create about 16,000 jobs in the first few years. So a really exciting time. This year, the first cultivated meat approval happened in the UK, and it was for pet food. But
Yeah.
for us, it's saying, hey, this is safe,
Yeah.
which is great. And we're inching ever closer to being able to put it on people's plates and in your grocery stores. And it also just signals to me that it's a friendly space for innovation,
Yeah.
right? Like we all, assuming positive intent, which is something I endeavor to do in everything, we all want the UK to have its best chance to lead the world in whatever we're doing. So whether that's sustainable energy, whether that's the best train system or food system, I think I'm assuming that all regulators and government officials are open and willing to something like this, as long as they have the information that they need.
Yeah.
And I think with any innovation, the name of the game is let's have clean, unbiased data. So I think given all those things, we're gonna have an easy time. But I think a few of those will be a little shaky. So I'm feeling very optimistic about approval, hopefully within the next year. But again, I have full faith in the FSA, which is our regulating body here for those who are international. I have full faith in them to do exactly what they need to do and ask for the resources they need to push things like this along.
Are there learnings from other jurisdictions like the regulatory approval in the
Yeah.
US or Singapore, other parts of the world, Israel perhaps as well? Are there learnings that can be taken and transferred when it comes to regulatory approval models?
Yeah, and luckily, wonderfully, and unsurprisingly, this industry is really collaborative because
Yeah.
it's full of a lot of people who are really excited about the incredible innovations that are happening. I'm totally overusing that word, but it's true. So they're willing to say, hey, this is where we stumbled, this is where we thrived, this is what I would do differently, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That being said, a lot of our processes are pretty different.
Okay.
And like two power bars going to market, getting regulatory approval, they're going to have a different process, even if they're like a pea protein and a whey protein,
Yeah.
right? So, yes, we're collaborative, and yes, there are learnings, but I think as it should be, each process is being individually assessed. Um, I know right now the US has two brands that have been approved or two products. Singapore has one, and Israel has the first beef,
Yeah.
which is incredible. So things are moving and shaking, and there's
Yeah.
product on the market in Singapore in grocery, which is interesting, about 3% inclusion chicken product. And then the US has seen a few Michelin star restaurants launch dishes and tasting menus. So I think honestly, over the next year or two, we're going to see a lot of really interesting products pop up. I know Vow, for those of you who are interested, I could talk about this all day. So this is the last thing I'll say. Vow just did a really interesting take on quail in
Uh-huh.
Singapore.
Yeah.
And it looks almost like a little dollop of pureed quail, I guess. Like you would see like a little parfait kind
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
And their take on it is basically this is our type of quail. Like it is not a Dutch
Yeah.
brush quail. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's a big, it is the Val Qualia, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so fun and interesting. Of course, there's going to be pushback, and there's a lot of energy around food, and the yuck factor that comes with it. But I think I'm very optimistic about the way that consumers have been curious and excited about what cultivated meat is all over the world.
Yeah. And you touch on something quite interesting there, and about the sort of the application of this. And I suppose when we think about initially cellular meat, your first reference is perhaps sort of cellular steaks or cellular burgers or sausages, but is the way forward for this, or one of the routes forward, actually combining it with other perhaps either animal-based products or plant-based products in as an ingredient, perhaps. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, one thing, and to get a little sciencey here, really briefly, one thing I find really interesting is if you look at a cell of a plant, any plant item, so oats, barley, celery, and a cell from an animal, the cell from the animal has a flexible cell membrane because they're absorbing nutrients, and the cell in a plant does not. So that's why it has more fiber, it's more slowly digested. So when we're creating products, combining the two, one for structure and one for nutrients, is the way to go right now for where the industry is.
Yeah.
So I would reckon, and for what I have been focusing on personally, is finding really incredibly structured plant-based items that have the chew, they have the bite, they have the texture, but they need that fatty mouthfeel. They need a boost in nutrients without a really long laundry list of additives that might not necessarily be bad, but consumers don't love it. And they need the meaty aromas and honestly to mitigate the aftertaste of plant-based items. I have come from the plant-based space in the US. I used to work at a company called Impossible Foods, and we had a lot of people who were focused on how to mitigate that aftertaste of soy. And soy is a powerhouse. So I hope that everybody gets on board with soy, but for those who don't want to and want to have the meaty experience, we need to figure out a way. So I think commercialization in the next year will be heavily focusing on blends, which is great because it puts the economic strain and demand on different kinds of things. So we're not just depleting one resource. So innovation, I think, will look like those kinds of partnerships.
Well, and I guess that very beautifully segues on to commercial partnerships. I know it's obviously a key part of what you do, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the exciting commercial partnerships that you have in play, which really brings to life how this technology can start to manifest itself.
Yeah, well, and again, this is one of the things I love the most about my job is you really get to connect with people who have an eye towards what the future of food is going to be. And I think nowadays you don't have people sailing off to explore new countries and all these completely novel things. So the ability to be part of a completely novel idea, cultivated meat, is just incredible. And I feel really lucky to get to chat with people when they're first discovering it because the energy is it's just so pure and happy. And it's a big challenge, don't get me wrong. So I think the people that we have partnerships with so far center mostly around obviously retail and grocery, blended products either with animal or plant-based, and then you have kind of more impact-focused partnerships. So one of the ones I'm developing right now is actually with a farming group in the UK who came to me and said, we know that there are challenges with this industry. We don't want to fall prey to the pressures of factory farm pricing. Can we work together to make sure we can maintain our standards and also meet the demand of protein as we grow to 10 billion people? And I think the curiosity and gumption of that to be like, hey, I don't understand what you're doing, but I hope that it can help us out and support our farmers. Oh, bread and butter. I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's wonderful. And then I think focusing solely more on commercial products, which is your original ask. Right now, that looks like partnering with grocery stores to say, hey, this is what our process looks like. Could this fit in anywhere to your hot bar? So like the ready meals that you see, or could we co-create a product that you sell under your brand and we get some level of inclusion of cultivated meat in there. And then a lot of that has been interesting because they have really lofty sustainability goals that are absolutely essential. So when you're thinking about these retailers that are looking at their kind of, I guess, bill of sustainable impacts.
Yeah.
Obviously, meat is going to be extremely high because it's the second largest driver of global warming.
Yeah.
So they're all like, well, we can't make everybody switch to veganism. So what do we do? Being part of that solution is really wonderful. One of our most concrete partnerships right now that I can mention is we partner with a company called Finnebrogue in Northern Ireland. I think I mentioned them earlier.
Yeah.
Really incredible group of people, and we take their cells.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of our cell lines in-house are from their cows.
Yeah. Okay.
They want to figure out how to make product for the future.
Yeah.
So we have an agreement with them that they'll take off a certain amount of our volume when we start producing. And that is an essential for this industry because they have the knowledge of their consumer, they have the knowledge of the supply chain.
Yeah.
And like I said, the people here have absolutely astonishing minds, right? PhDs, discovering new things literally every day, just
Yeah.
incredible. And that's what we need them to do, but that's not going to get us over the line with creating a product that people will buy.
Yeah.
For the same reason that I'm talking to you instead of our head of media science,
Yeah.
right? It's just a different skill set.
Yeah.
So what they bring to the table and their needs are really a driving force to the future of protein, right? It's going to be a group effort. And
Yeah, definitely.
what I really want everyone to take away from this is that we're in no way trying to replace animal farming as a whole. That's not what we want to do. The goal is to create a sustainable future for protein where we can all have access to clean, healthy protein as the population grows. Right now, we don't have a pathway to that with the traditional system. So it's about figuring out, hey, what can we replace? What can we make better so that we don't have to burn the Amazon down to have enough grazing space for cows? Like, what can we do to not import so much beef? So it's more of the Bezos Earth Fund always says it's a yes and,
Yeah.
which I really like. And I think it's going back to that idea of assuming positive intent, that everybody wants us to have a future where we're doing our best.
Yeah.
And treating everyone and everything with respect. I think that idea is something that I hope that this industry hangs its hat on as we move forward.
That's fascinating to hear that we've got that level already, that level of, I guess, collaboration and open-mindedness in certain areas. I'm sure it's not universal with a disruptive technology. You wouldn't expect that, but it's inspiring actually to think that those conversations are already happening about what this could look like, and you've got proactivity from all different parts of the industry coming to you to discuss that future pathway.
Coming from the commercial side, data is my best friend.
Yeah.
I'd like to know objectively that consumers like X or Y. That's really hard to do, but you can try your best.
Yeah.
And there was a group here that recently did a study, and basically the question was, how do farmers feel about cultivated meat? General consensus. And as soon as I read that title, honestly, like I said, a lot of people don't know what we're doing. And there's a lot of fear in the world right now, rightfully so. It's very turbulent. There's a lot going on. It's a lot to manage for anyone. So change is hard. So when people don't know about something, they make a lot of assumptions. And titles like that just make me nervous. So I clicked in and I read it, and it honestly was so uplifting because it basically was, I'd like to know more. I don't know enough. Makes me a little nervous, but I want to know more.
Yeah.
And I think as humans, our curiosity and intelligence is what makes life worth living.
Yeah.
And it just really reinforced my belief that when people are given the opportunity to do something good and to learn and explore something new, they will take it.
Yeah.
And especially hearing from farmers that they want solutions that can help them and work with them, it just made me very happy. So I'm feeling very optimistic.
And I suppose it's also, I mean, they take some reassurance probably from your future vision about that there isn't one answer to solving some of the biggest challenges.
Not exclusive.
Yeah, exactly. The future mix, whether that's much broader when you consider food and drink or just protein, as we're talking about today. That there isn't one answer to solving those challenges. It's
Yeah.
a combination of things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I had a question about the investment landscape. From an outsider looking in, it would, I guess, appear like, well, I suppose like us all, the era of cheap money and perhaps, being a little bit more open-minded, less risk averse. Has that changed over the last few years from an investment perspective and an appetite perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the God, that's such an interesting question. And I think you're absolutely right. The general consensus in investment right now is not abundant. People are curious, they're reluctant, and I think we luckily have an investor that really believes in what we're doing and is very committed. So we're quite secure in what we're doing, and we know what our scientific timelines look like, and we're chugging along.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, and in my own opinion, coming from the plant-based space and watching the boom and cool off, is whenever there's anything new, like if you look at the classic example of Tesla, it's like that amazing, oh my gosh, what is this? Amazing, amazing. It's gonna change the world. Oh, is it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Cool off, and then like
Yeah.
stabilization.
Yeah.
Right now, alternative proteins are in that cool off, and I would expect that stabilization
Yeah.
shortly, just because we simply can't move forward as a society with the food system we have. It's just not an option. I'm sorry if that sounds aggressive. It just won't work.
Yeah.
If you look at the numbers, we can't feed 10 billion on this current system. We can barely feed them now. So in terms of survival, we have to have some innovation. I think that when certain cultivated meat companies hit milestones and prove concept and have really robust partnerships that are long term, I think we'll see investors kind of say, oh, okay, I see where this is going. I see the essential nature of this tech. I think it will be, and again, this is just my opinion, but I think it will be largely in the next year or so impact driven funds. So, like an SOSV, for example, where they have more than multipliers as their motivation. And obviously, they're excellent at business, but they also have an eye towards what we need.
Yeah.
So I think it's not easy.
No.
Honestly, and it's a new technology, and it's kind of a survival of the fittest right now, which I think a lot of people also forget this is how the economy works.
Yes.
Right? Like you have to be, again, human nature. If something doesn't work, we innovate, we get scrappy, we test and learn. And the scientific process is a lot of failure, which it should be, because you find the thing that works.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I think that, again, going back to that the discrepancy in how like scientists communicate versus how people in business communicate, it's not that the industry is failing, it's that it's not the same process as a Tesla. And it's not the same process as tech. This is deep science and food. It's just different. It's not the venture capital multiplier. So I think just like regulatory, it's an uncharted territory. And I think we're going to see people specialize in it, and we're going to see more education around it, more understanding, and we're going to see a lot of those really fascinating applications of the technology blossom and bloom. And it's honestly about patience right now, and not knocking it till you try it, literally. So I know a lot of people have kind of that fear mentality and that scarcity mentality right now. I think that's okay. I don't share it because, one, it has to work, and two, I deeply believe in the ability of the people I work with and those who I've met in the industry to figure it out as they have so far. Because I mean, you wouldn't even the progress that we have made as a business, a lot of the people here come from biopharma, and they're like, this is just unprecedented speed. Right? Like it's just so fast for science. And I think that scientists think it's amazing, and people in commercial are like, it's not fast enough. It's not fast enough. It's not just a chicken nugget. It's like the world's most advanced chicken nugget, right? So it's just about perspective, and that works for investment, it works for
Yeah.
regulatory, it works for
Yeah.
consumer acceptance. It's just kind of all about that.
What's your view on, yeah, I guess consumer readiness and acceptance, and perhaps, is that, do you see that, is that different in different geographies or different generations? We've done a little bit of work in that space, but I'd be interested to hear your view.
Answer is yes. I expect everyone to be vastly different. And I'll try to get more specific on that. So I want everybody to imagine for a second that you're in a grocery store, and like a big nice one, like a UK Whole Foods or like a really nice Sainsbury's or Waitrose. And if you look at all the different meat products on the shelf, it's thousands,
Yeah.
both fresh, frozen, dried, what
Yeah.
have you, liver, chicken breast, whatever. In every country and even in different regions of the United States, that offering is different
Yeah.
based on cultural norms, based on the demographics of that area of a city. So if it's an older crowd, it's going to be different meat products. So absolutely, everybody's going to be different. And I think honestly, at the end of the day, it's important that we have offerings for everyone. I'm not saying that everyone's going to accept cultivated meat right away. I would expect that the early innovators will be probably wealthy, highly educated millennials
Mm.
and Gen Zs, let's say, to
Yeah.
give it a tag. And I don't have the research to back this up. This is my own inference, everyone. But it'll be kind of people that understand the implications of meat, are excited to try new things, yada yada. And the last people will be those who are risk averse and they eat the
Yeah.
same thing for lunch every day, you know. Um, and everybody's going to have a different motivation, right? Normally for people, it's taste first, then price, and then you have health, and then you have animal welfare and sustainability as tertiary motivators. And this is a lot of inference from plant-based as well. So we're going to see a little shakeup, but that's kind of the motivation landscape. But I think that when we're looking at consumer acceptance, we can refer back to that grocery store chain that we've been talking to that did, I think I mentioned this earlier, but they did a survey of their consumers.
Yeah.
And again, it was curious, it was more information, it was what'll it look like? It was just, I want to know more.
Yeah.
It's not a no, it's, I'm not sure, tell me more. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And then with like that farming survey as well, like it's curiosity. And I think for me, when I speak to people, it's the classic, for any of you plant-based eaters out there, you sit down at Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner and your grandma, your auntie is like, oh, you don't eat meat? Or like, oh, organic meat, ugh. Like whatever it is, resistance to change, a little bit of fear, but it's still they're asking the question, right? It's not get away from me.
Yeah.
It's like, but like why?
Yeah.
You know, it's like that little like healthy tension, right? Everyone should be so curious about what they eat. You should be curious about where it comes from, what's in it, how it affects you. It's
Yeah.
really interesting. Even like your blood sugar spike in a carrot versus a piece of broccoli. Really, if anybody hasn't read Glucose Revolution, I totally would recommend it. It's fascinating the way your body reacts to food. Anyway, tangent. I think that again, there's a lot of research to be done when we have product in market for people to try. There's a lot of things we can infer about how people will accept the product, but I think weirdly, I'm not that nervous about consumer acceptance because I think that people are looking for solutions. People, again, assume positive intent, want to do the best they can for themselves and the environment. And I think when we bring the product to market, we'll be really pleasantly surprised at how curious people are.
Leading on from that, there are clearly, and you'd expect this with an emerging disruptive technology, there are a lot of misconceptions around cultivated meat.
Yeah.
And you've spent a good part of your career in this sort of broad area. What would you say some of those misconceptions are?
Oh man. Oh, they're such funny ones. I think one of the things that's really interesting is people get nervous about what cultivated meat will do to you when you eat it. Like,
Mm.
what is it? Is it going to keep growing when I eat it?
Yeah,
And my question is always, does a burger keep growing
yeah,
when you eat it? Because it's the same thing. It's
yeah,
just pure muscle and pure fat cells. They're not alive.
yeah,
It's meat like you buy at the supermarket. It's just made very differently. So I think when people get nervous about the health implications, there's nothing in those cells that isn't in the burgers you're eating.
yeah. Okay.
And it's quite a bit cleaner in theory.
Yeah,
Right? Like we're not dealing with any of the contaminant
yeah,
risks of the
okay.
slaughterhouse. I
Yeah,
think like 43 million people in the US alone each year get food poisoning or foodborne illness. 43 million. And we don't have those parasites and those bacteria because we don't have exposure to the digestive tract of a cow or a pig
mm,
or anything like that. So I think the misconception on like highly processed or contamination risk is just not. Again, I would encourage people whenever I have this conversation, we have the convo, and then I say, get really curious about where that argument came from. Like, where did you hear highly processed?
yeah,
And this is a whole different, we could have a whole different talk on this. But one thing when I first got into this industry was I got really curious about who is funding the research I was reading
yeah,
because normally the questions, the research paradigm is how much protein will an egg give you? Or how good for your bones is dairy?
mm,
Instead of
mm,
what does dairy do to your bones?
yeah,
Or are eggs the best source of protein, right? Like it's the question being asked, no malintent. It just
yeah,
is who's funding that's who's asking the question and paying
yeah,
the bill. So I think when you're looking at like where did highly processed come from? A lot of people say the American Beef Association was like, oh my gosh, what can we poke a hole in? And we won't get down this track, but like just get curious
yeah,
about why you're freaking out about highly processed and the difference between highly processed sourdough bread from your local bakery, because that's a processed food
yeah,
versus like a slab of Velveeta cheese
yeah,
that's been in the grocery store for a year, let's say. Like
yeah,
that's not the case, but um, I think, yeah, get curious. And it comes, like you said, the misconceptions. Just ask questions and try to figure out for yourself because your diet is so and your impact on the environment is so unique to you. You get to make the choices if you ask the questions and
yeah.
you're fully informed.
What's your view, I guess, on how the protein landscape will evolve into the future? And I suppose I think one of the questions I think it has got to be in the forefront of everyone's mind that is listening today is when. And that's what everyone wants to know, right? When, when will, when can we expect to, buy this in retail? When can we expect to, order this in a restaurant?
Yeah,
Those are, I think, in the conversations that I've had with industry, those are the things that people are asking. What do you think
totally.
that journey looks like over the next few years?
That's the $1 million question, right?
Yes.
And we already have product on the market all over the world,
Mhm.
just in well, all over the world, the US and Singapore. I think that it will depend here in the UK, it'll depend on regulatory. So I
Yeah.
think as soon as we have regulatory approval, we'll get product out in the market.
Mhm.
Um, Hopefully late next year, 100% respecting the process and timeline of the FSA.
Mhm.
Um, we will get product out to people as soon as we're allowed to.
Yeah.
So I would say a safe bet is 2026,
Mhm.
and we will push very hard for 2025.
Yeah.
Mass production, that's a different story because we're still developing our processes, right? We're getting basically from pharmaceutical grade process, which is where this tech is developed, to food grade, which
Yeah.
is scalable,
Okay.
cost effective, widely available.
Mhm.
We're in the midst of it. We have a clear path and challenges that we know how to tackle. It's just a question of time and testing and making sure it is, in fact, the next generation of meat, right? Better in every way. So um, I would say safely 2026.
Mhm.
You can go to a special restaurant and get it, or you can go to an activation at your local retailer and try a piece of cultivated Wagyu
Yeah.
beef
Yeah.
as part of your everyday diet, hopefully within the next 5 years,
5 years.
5 to 10. But yeah. Again, commercial perspective. So take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
From my understanding, that's my answer.
Yeah. And you touched on this earlier on, and I suppose I'm really interested in this because, as part of this summit, we're going to be talking about regenerative agriculture, right? So where's this where do you see this intersection between what cellular can bring and the more traditional agriculture sector, of which many parts of the industry consumers will feel pretty attached to?
Absolutely. And I am a huge fan of regenerative ag and biodynamic ag. I think it's the future. What I want to do is work with any and all farmers, communities, companies that want to forward those practices and want to work with the land, with communities. 100%. That's the future. If we could all do that, I would quit today and go get my regenerative ag certification and do my thing. I want to mitigate the need for factory farming, which is driving down prices and driving up the need for things like antibiotics, added hormones, all the things that make mass production for an unnatural process necessary.
Yeah.
So in theory, if we can get rid of the more heinous factory farming, we can allow space and breathing room for farmers who want to be regenerative and want to go to their local farmers market, go to their regional grocery chain and have really high quality cuts of meat. Awesome, healthy, good for the environment. Pastoral grazing is very natural. It's part of the ecosystem, right? Yes, let's do that. 100%. I want to work with those farmers, take a piece of maybe one of their cows and say, hey, if you guys want to do a lower cost burger, let's do a blend. So it'll be 50% cultivated meat, 50% Bessie.
Yeah.
And you can sell those at a lower price point and keep your steaks at a higher price point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I think that will be how we work, and we'll aim at the most impactful forms of farming to mitigate that, right? So that's how I see that working, and that's how our current partnership is shaping up.
Yeah, super exciting. That's right. I'm really inspired by what you've said on that, and I'm sure the audience will be as well. Just as a sort of a final question, just what would you want people, the audience, there's thousands of people listening today from across the food and drink industry, what would you want their key takeouts from this to be?
Oh my goodness. I think curiosity is key. Can't say that enough. I think get really curious about where your food's coming from, how it's made, and what the motivations for the person selling it to you are, no matter if it's meat, celery, whatever, yogurt. And then I think optimism is key. Nothing is ever done by being extremely negative about something not being maybe the most optimal solution. It's still a solution being presented. So I think look at the amazing efforts that are being put in by so many incredible and inspired people in alternative protein, in regenerative ag, in all these areas where they want to make the world a better place and they're trying really hard. Support them and just say thank you for what you're doing, because it can be really hard. It's an uphill battle, and then people get mad that it's not perfect yet, and I totally get that. But just do whatever you can to stay curious and stay optimistic about the potential of the space.
Yeah. And as you rightly said at the beginning, we need it needs to move. We need an evolution from where we are now, because it's not sustainable.
Yeah, exactly.
Super. But right, honestly, I feel like I could chat to you forever about this this super progressive space. Really, really interesting, informative. Really appreciate your your candid interjections and reflections. I think it's really helpful to bring it to life, and I guess normalize some of the language around this particular area. So a huge thank you from Team TFP and the 2024 Summit audience for sharing your knowledge and expertise. So thank you for joining us today, Riley. Much appreciated.
Absolutely my honor, and I appreciate the space to talk about it.